The Penn State Nittany Lions emasculate the SMU Mustangs. They battered SMU, beating them 38-10, and led 28-0 at the end of the first half. That, by the way, that was the same halftime score. As Penn State versus Washington, a conference opponent of Penn State's who finished 6-6. Just saying. The difference between these two teams was very stark here. And I wrote down on my notes, which we took while live doing play-by-play commentary for this game and interacting with the chat. It's very fun. Hundreds of concurrent viewers. You should join us. I wrote down that Kevin Jennings' accuracy is terrible, frankly, and that Penn State owned the line of scrimmage, that the only advantage SMU had over Penn State was the fact that their wide receiver room was better than Penn State's, but that's not saying much, and outside of that, Penn State was better and significantly better everywhere else. Really what happened here was a snowball effect, both literally and figuratively. Figuratively, in the sense that after the 2 pick sixes, Penn State had built a very comfortable lead, and knowing how their offense operates, it was inevitable that at some point their offense was going to start scoring points, and SMU was in a big hole that they had to climb out of. And their quarterback didn't have the accuracy, the playmaking capability, and their defense just wasn't deep enough to do that. And then figuratively, in the sense that it was very cold, it was very windy, the environment in both crowd noise, in the circumstances SMU placed themselves in, and the weather did not play to the Mustangs' strengths at all. So SMU just got destroyed by Penn State in a first-round playoff game that was Penn State's first ever postseason whiteout. Before we resume here, I want to encourage you all to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Hit that subscribe button, click the notification bell so that you can get notified when we go live, not just for weekly live shows where we do previews, predictions, react to college football news, but also when we go live for the college football playoff games. We're going to be going live for all the quarterfinals, semifinals, and national championship games. So that means Boise State versus Penn State in the Fiesta Bowl, Ohio State, Oregon in the Rose Bowl. That means Texas versus Arizona State in the Peach Bowl, and Notre Dame, Georgia in the Sugar Bowl. We'll be going live for all of those. You won't want to miss those. So hit the notification bell so that you can get notified when we go live for those, for weekly shows, and also when we release new content video format here on College Football with Sam. We need your help to help us build the best Big Ten football channel and college football channel on YouTube. Only you can help us do that. And thank you very much for hitting that subscribe button. Also, like the video, comment your reaction to this game down below, join our Discord server via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. And if you want to support the channel monetarily, donate some money to support the work we do, you can make a purchase on our merchandise store or Patreon page via the links in the description or down below in the pinned comment, or maybe you can just send a super chat in the comment section. But thank you for your support. I appreciate it a lot. And I think the first thing I want to get to after our impact statistics is the environment of Penn State, just very briefly. But if I told you that Penn State was +3 in turnovers and they forced 2 pick sixes, meaning their defense scored 2 touchdowns, you would know that Penn State not just wins, but that they probably cover here. So that was a big part of this matchup, were the pick sixes, Penn State's defensive effort. I think it was their best game on defense relative to an opponent all season long. In hindsight, given how good Ohio State's offense looked against Tennessee, maybe that Ohio State game was up there, but this was very, very, very impressive. And I keep looking at the notes because the first quarter, it was a close game in the first quarter. It looked like SMU might be able to drive down, get some points. They had that 4th and 1 where Jennings got greedy. If he just ran it, he would have picked up a first down, and SMU probably would have opened up the game with the lead, but he tried to get it to Matthew Hibner in the end zone, got greedy, fell incomplete, and from there, SMU's offense fell apart. Penn State's defense stepped up, and it was loud. It was loud. It was a hostile environment, and I just want to say here that I don't think that Fox and Joel Klatt and Gus Johnson, the people at Big Noon Kickoff, I don't think they get it. I really don't. And I like listening to them at times. I do, but I don't think they get it. The fact that having these games at night, and I get you can't do that for every game in the postseason. That's perfectly logical from a TV time frame scheduling perspective. But in the regular season, why can't we have a whiteout for a big game for Penn State? Why can't Ohio State have a night game? Why can't Michigan have more big-time night games? It helps these environments blossom and reach their full potential. These home field teams, the teams hosting opponents, whether in the regular season or in the playoff, they don't want the Richter scale for earthquakes to measure a 1 or a 2 or a 3. They want a 4 or a 5. And giving them that night time slot can really help them do that. And it's just better for the sport of college football. And honestly, it's better for viewership too. It is. So everyone wins with that in my mind. Not saying Fox can't call night games. They probably can. They figure it out. They're the most dominant network. So I just wanted to put that out there. But Penn State dominated this game. And I think SMU is a classic example of the laws of college football. And what I mean by that is they deserve to get in under the 12-team format. SMU did for sure. But they were never winning at all. Both things can be true. That Alabama, in getting humiliated by Oklahoma, looking like crap against Tennessee and crap against Vanderbilt, that negated their win over Georgia. It did. And I imagine if those two teams rematched that Georgia would win. Because Alabama basically came out with a one-trick pony of changing schemes that confused Georgia. And while really, I think Alabama also took their foot off the gas, I think that if they were to rematch, Georgia would probably have something to say about Alabama, as Alabama's kind of been figured out as the year goes on. But at the same time, I can say that and say that SMU therefore was deserving of getting in under this format, but that the format is ultimately crap because we want teams competing for a national championship who actually can compete. Or if you're okay with some teams like SMU getting in and getting blown out like they did, you have to understand and be honest about the fact that barring a miracle, they won't win it all. And also, if you're going to do that, you should probably redo the seeding so that Oregon faces a team like SMU or they face Clemson so that they're properly rewarded instead of, playing Ohio State in the Rose Bowl, which again is off of a bye. So I don't think that Oregon is as screwed as a lot of people say, because I think in a lot of, like Texas, for example, Texas would rather play Ohio State in the Rose Bowl and get that week of rest so that their center and right tackle don't potentially metaphorically die in football terms, like get injured so that it hampers a further run. They would rather have that. They would rather have that bye. A lot of these good teams, I think, would rather have the byes than potentially a easier path that includes an extra game because that increases the probability of injuries. But regardless, you want to maximize the benefit that Oregon can get. And I also think that, I don't know, I'm rambling a bit, but I think SMU is an example of the laws of football in the sense that there are not 12 teams in football every year who can win it all. That's not how the sport operates. At most, there are 8, 7, maybe 9. I'm saying that because I'm thinking about last year with the college football playoff. Then, you had Michigan, Ohio State, Florida State, Washington, Oregon. You had, of course, Texas, Georgia, Alabama. Like, you had a lot of teams last year who I think, depending on how things fell at the end of the season, could have won it all. But that was last year, and I think last year was a weirdly strong year at the top in terms of the number of teams who could win it all. And then in 2022, you really only had maybe 3 or 4. In 2021, it was probably Ohio State, Georgia, and Bama that year, maybe Michigan, depending on the matchup they got. There's usually only anywhere from 2 to maybe 4 or 5 teams every year who can win it all. That's it. SMU's not one of those teams. They're not even a top 10 team analytically. So they were never winning at all. Maybe they could have won this game, but eventually they would have fell. And people need to understand that SMU, while deserving of getting into their format, was never going to win the national championship without some type of miracle. They held up on the line of scrimmage, though, but for only about a quarter and a half, and then eventually they fell apart. They forced 3 sacks and 5 TFLs on Penn State. They held up all right in the run to start off, but eventually Nick Dawkins, Sal Wormley, J.B. Nelson, Olivega Ione, and then Singleton and Allen behind them wore out SMU's front. And then SMU's O-line just was getting destroyed by Abdul Carter. The epitome of this game is Bird, SMU's left tackle. He's right here. This is him, little index finger. This guy is Abdul Carter. Now, Abdul Carter's like bouncing around and bobbing up every time he's like matched up in 9-tech on their O-line. And all he has to do is just get around him, of course, which is very hard. Every play, he just just goes around Bird. And the only way he doesn't is if Bird's holding him blatantly. There was a play where Abdul Carter's being held, and he pulls the left tackle with him as he sacks Jennings all the way back, almost out of field goal range. Actually, he did sack him out of field goal range. SMU tried to get a field goal on that play and then failed. They eventually fell apart. And that was SMU's strength, really, was their lines of scrimmage. And Penn State dominated them up there. So that was something that went hugely in the Nittany Lions' favor. By the way, I predicted Penn State to win 34-17, so I expected them to eventually wear out SMU, but not to this degree. And last thing I'll say about SMU is that Kevin Jennings, who's the future of their program at QB, that's why they didn't play anyone else, is because he's a sophomore. He's going to be back for them next year. He's going to be their starting QB for 2025, and I do think that he's a good QB. But he does have turnover issues, and he finally faced for the first time in his career a top 5 defense, and he completely crumbled. 20 of 36, 195 passing yards, 5.4 yards per attempt. He had a touchdown, 3 interceptions, negative 25 ground yards, and a 13.8 quarterback efficiency rating. Just a bad game for SMU, bad game for Kevin Jennings, and Penn State worked them every which way, especially from their defense. I mean, Tom Allen's unit had 2 pick sixes, one by Tony Rojas, who's had a little bit of a mediocre year in my mind, and Dominic DeLuca, a backup linebacker who started his career as a walk-on. He had a pick 6 as well. 2 pick sixes. And then DeLuca had another pick in the red zone when SMU was looking to score. He tipped it in the air and picked it off in the air. It was a phenomenal series in the first half for Penn State's defense. They responded. I mean, after Oregon, where Oregon hung 45 points on them, Allen's unit, which couldn't get any stops against Oregon outside of occasional ones that were almost flukish in a way, responded here against an SMU offense that entered this game certainly as a top 15 unit in my mind, that had an athletic QB in Jennings, some good receivers, an all-right offensive line that had Brashard Smith at running back, one of the better running backs in the ACC. And they only allowed 10 points, 253 total yards, 21 first downs. SMU was held to 0.132 points per play because they had several trips inside of Penn State territory that went for absolutely no points. And they never had explosive plays. All their drives were dink and dunk here and there. Penn State missing a tackle, which that's Penn State's weakness really on defense, is the fact that they're not elite in fundamental soundness. They aren't. They're very, very talented. And that D-line against every O-line I've seen wins interior leverage, at least when the game isn't over. Like against Ohio State, when Penn State turned it over 4th and goal, a lot of people have maintained that showed Ohio State's O-line was, back. I always maintain it's because Penn State's defense quit because they knew the offense couldn't do anything. But in every game, that D-line gets interior leverage or outside leverage. They win. It's just a question of whether or not the DBs or linebackers are going to tackle properly, because they don't always do that. And I think that whether it's this year or years prior, that has been a consistent theme of Penn State's defense sometimes, is they're not elite tacklers. But they still had a really good game here. The pick sixes, they did well overall in coverage. They took risks that I thought were appropriate. They read SMU's offense like a book. And they shut him out in the first half, and SMU didn't get a touchdown until garbage time, until, the game was already well in hand for Penn State. I mean, at one point it was 38-3 at one point for Penn State, and it looked like it could have been 45-3. But then Penn State did the wise thing. They put in all their backups, including Grunkmeyer, now their backup QB. And speaking of just how dominant this game was, and really that D-line and how powerful and fast and athletic and deep they are, does Penn State have the best trench play in college football? I said that after the Big Ten championship game when they beat Oregon in the trenches, but Oregon won the air attack in such a phenomenal way that it rarely didn't matter that a Big Ten team lost the trenches. They just won regardless. Kind of like how Ohio State has at some points in the previous several seasons of football that the Buckeyes have played. Because I look at Penn State after this game, and I got to think to myself that when you adjust for the opponent they've played, I think that maybe for 2 games in a row, they've had some of the most, if not the most impressive trench play in the country. I think the only other team that right now is sniffing Penn State's trench play in the playoffs from the first round would potentially be Notre Dame. And even then, I think that Indiana's O-line is similar to SMU's. Better, I'd say, at power running, or maybe similar, but better in pass protection. And then on D-line, I think Indiana's D-line is better, but Indiana's D-line did pretty well against Notre Dame's offensive line. Pretty solidly. Not as much better than SMU's D-line did against Penn State's offensive line. So I think there's a lot of credibility to the idea that Penn State right now is in the college football playoff. No, their wide receiver core isn't amazing. Their special teams has questions. Allar is not the nation's best QB and has some things he needs to work on. And this offense isn't totally fixed. But at the same time, I think they're also sitting with a huge non-negotiable in their trench play that will prevent anyone from really building a massive lead on them that's insurmountable. Like Oregon almost did. But then Penn State came back, and their play in the trenches really helped them make it a game when Oregon at times looked like they could pull away, and Penn State stopped them from doing so. They had 189 rushing yards on the ground for 4.7 yards per carry, 3 rushing touchdowns, and on defense they had 3 sacks, 11 TFLs, and they only allowed 58 rushing yards for 1.6 yards per carry. And that was against Brashard Smith and LJ Johnson, 2 good running backs. So I think there's potentially credibility to that statement. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. And last but not least, this doesn't take anything away from Penn State. In fact, it adds to Penn State. They have one of the best home field advantages in college football. And that, plus the weather, well, that added to the blowout. That was the icing on the cake for Penn State football, was the fact that their fans showed up and their team showed up. And it was 20-mile-per-hour winds, which I think played into some of the inaccuracies of both QBs. And everything in a lot of ways went Penn State's way. Not to the point where I'm saying Penn State's lucky. I don't think they were. But a lot of things went Penn State's way. And that's been the case with a lot of these home playoff teams because home field advantage matters. There's a reason why it's given 3 points by Vegas, and there's a reason why I've maintained that depending on the home field advantage, it matters more than 3 points. Like, home field advantage for some of these playoff games might be worth a touchdown. And if it's played in a different area, maybe it's a closer game. I don't think any of the teams that won in the first round would have lost if they had to travel to the other team's stadium, but it could have been closer in some regards. And this is going to be me continuing my criticism of Big Noon Kickoff. Like, it's okay that Penn State, Ohio State maybe should be a night game, or Penn State, Oregon can be a night game and a whiteout, or Penn State, Michigan. Like, isn't there a way that Fox can call like a night game? Like, can they work that out maybe in the next contract or something? I don't get it. But I think it's once again shows that the TV executives and a lot of the people running college football don't understand the sport, and they also don't have its best interests in mind. But SMU was not prepared for the stadium environment, for the weather, and I think that canceled out Penn State's slow start that SMU could have capitalized on. So we'll see what happens in the future with college football, the playoff games, and the night games, but all I know is that Penn State's playing Boise State in the Fiesta Bowl. I hope they do well there, and as for SMU, I hope that the preseason treats you well. So go Mustangs, and go Nittany Lions. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also hit that notification bell so that way you can get notified when new content from College Football with Sam drops. I appreciate you very much, and also share the video around to others who you know enjoy the sport of college football and love it as I do and as you do, and comment your thoughts down below so that we can have a conversation, because I want to know what you are thinking. And join our Discord server where we talk college football 24/7 via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. Thank you to my Heisman Patreon members, Crash2488, Brascal Rascal, and Carlo OH. Thank you to my All-American Patreon members, Chris Lane, Ismar, and Tyler Nye. And thank you to my All-Conference members, John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Joshua Jorgensen, and Will Loftus. Make sure to check out my merchandise store and or Patreon page, or super chat down in the comment section below to support the channel. The Patreon page and merchandise store links are in the description or down below in the pinned comment. I hope you have a wonderful day. It is December, so Merry Christmas and also Happy New Year. I will see you guys soon.